Isabel de Vasconcellos. I'm a writer and a curator, and I'm here at the Mead Gallery at the University of Warwick with Thomas Ellmer, who is the exhibition's curator and the curator of this exhibition by Daiga Grantina, Lilacs. The first thing I wanted us to talk about was the architecture of this gallery and how, to some extent, the decision to work with Daiga was because you had maybe a sense of the kind of response that she might have to the architecture and also the light in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So the gallery is essentially made up of 3 white cubes. It's an incredibly voluminous space. I'd seen ambitious projects by Daiga before, particularly one at the New Museum in New York, where she had not necessarily responded to the architecture, but it was a large-scale installation and was absolutely sort of site-specific. Our invitation to her for this exhibition was really to offer Daiga another opportunity to expand on the work she'd already done at the New Museum, but also with her gallery Emmeline in London, where she's had recent solo exhibitions, but smaller scale. And absolutely, the best thing about the Mead Gallery is the way in which artists can respond to the light, the height, the width, the depth. And I think you can play with the architecture in here as well. So that's what Daiga's done for this exhibition.
In terms of the choreography of these 3 spaces, it feels very much that there is a palette that predominates. Was that a starting point, or did that just evolve out of the conversations?
Yeah, so as you said, the title of the show is Lilacs, which comes from Daiga's native country, Latvia, and making reference to a Latvian shrub which blossoms at this time of the year, which Daiga refers to as a Latvian lilac. Although you find these plants all over Europe, in Portugal. We actually have some growing right now on campus at the university. So that's sort of where I guess the early conversations around a palette, a colour palette may come from. And I think absolutely within the show, you can see there are a couple of consistent palettes which emerge. So there's purples, blues, made up of blues and reds, but also corals, oranges and salmons that are then sort of refined with different whites and punctuated by greys and blacks.
There's an interesting way that you experience this exhibition as you move through it, because although, of course, this is a series of installations and sculptures, there's something actually quite painterly about how you experience it, sort of plane by plane. When you were coming together with all of the different works, is it a combination of old works and new works, and how was that determined?
Yeah, so, I mean, because of the vast space the Mead offers, we couldn't necessarily commission Daiga to produce an entirely new exhibition for the gallery. So this exhibition really traces about a decade of work from Daiga. So we have work which, I think the earliest work is from 2016, which is very different from the latest work. And the work behind us, for example, is a work made in 2026. The earlier work, which perhaps we'll focus on in a moment, is actually a much more dense, tactile, sculpturally significant work, floor-based as well. Whereas I think now you can see absolutely this sort of painterly quality, or these sensibilities that are now within the new work. So there's also this sense of lightness with other works as well. Often in the way she's also displayed the show, it's as if things are dematerializing, ascending before your eyes. But also, I think what brings it back round to sculptural practice is the way that Daiga makes objects which change before your eyes as physical things. So whether it's to do with the use of mesh in the work, or actually the way this work here, for example, is actually sort of pivoting on its in the way it's hung. There's a constant shifting and morphing of works, I guess.
And in terms of the materiality of the works, this is a very good one to look at, because it seems to combine quite a lot of the different qualities that she is bringing into play and experimenting with.
Yeah, totally. I mean, across all of the works, really, there's a consistent use of these materials. So you find plyboard or a type of wood, then often incorporated alongside that is spandex and latex or silicone. So that combination is sort of unique to the way Daiga works and the way that she assembles sculptures. But again, there is that reference to building up a sort of impasto painting, for example, with these different materials, which again brings it back to a kind of sculptural practice. But actually, I think what is significant about these new works is the way Daiga is using gesture and, actual paint to make marks. So she uses ink often on the plywood, which will be either sort of in a dappled quality, so that we have this sort of silver ink used on this work, which is dappled on this surface, and then you get these really quite sort of expressionist sort of gestures on top of the spandex.
We're talking about these frames. There are 3 of them, 1 in each room. At what point did they enter the conversation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's actually 4 frames in total, 3 new ones.
Okay.
This is a pre-existing work, but actually this frame or this sort of concept of the framing has been repeated across the exhibition. And I mean, something which Daiga is really driven by is a kind of quality of light, or being able to use light as a sort of malleable force, I guess. I suppose there's also a medium in some ways. So the Mead Gallery has a very unique ability to disperse light from its ceiling, essentially. And as the sun travels from east to west, it changes throughout the day. So within the galleries, the light is constantly changing. So if a cloud, reveals the sun, you see more light coming through in certain areas of the gallery. So Daiga responded directly to that and was actually thinking about these frames really as sort of light wells, which light could then, extend through in some ways. But also the framing is used as a device to create different channels for experiencing multiple works through. I mean, the gallery is 600 square meters, so we have this unique opportunity to see from the first gallery into the third gallery because of the way it's articulated in an L shape. So what's really great is the way Daiga has fabricated this space with new architecture to extend the display of works.
Not only has she fabricated it, she's also brought different aspects of the temporary architecture of the gallery into play. This would be perhaps a good time to talk about the panels and how they've been moved around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we have a series of sliding panels, which we really use to build larger walls off of when we're making painting shows mostly. But Daiga has been very interested in all of the furniture that the gallery offers, I guess, is a way of describing it. And so, again, has pulled these works out and pulled these screens out, and is describing them as piano keys. And there is absolutely something sort of musical and rhythmic about the display. So as you move from one work to the next, there's different pitches and tones in the works, particularly also because she's displaying works at various heights and levels, to benefit all of our audiences.
And there are different intervals and a sense of choreography, not only of the works in the space, but of the works changing in relation to your movement within the space.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really good point. So Daiga is one of the few artists, I guess, who really thinks about the way audiences encounter artworks, but also how they encounter space. So as you said, there's this sort of choreography. There's a physical act of viewing work in this exhibition, which is very unique to what we've done with Lilacs, that Daiga has brought to the Mead Gallery. So at once you might be looking towards a floor work, or you're looking, directly towards the light above you, and a work which is placed very high. So yes, and I think that brings a perspective actually back to the viewer. So we were talking earlier about this sort of corporeal notion to the work that, whilst the viewer is looking at an artwork, they're actually thinking about their own body, I guess.
Well, you're aware of your eye being guided up or down or somewhere unexpected where you don't expect to see something. And that must have been quite fun for you as a curator to be part of that dialogue.
Absolutely, yeah. And to some extent, I'm not sure I even quite realised to the extent which Daiga would play with the space, actually. Whilst I knew we had the architecture to be fabricated, I wasn't aware of how she wanted to display works in the space. That's been something which has developed across this week and in a very intuitive and playful way. So, as you said, it's been a privilege to be involved with. Absolutely.
And through the course of the development of this show, have you had a sense from Daiga of the kind of feelings that she's wanting to elicit, or maybe the ideas that she's wanting to suggest in the viewer, because the works can feel quite oblique, but collectively they do give you a sense, you do feel like you're being gently led towards something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, this is a really playful and joyful exhibition at a time where I think socially and politically and economically it can feel desperate. I mean, something which we try to do with the programme in the gallery is offer a space for people to step away from everyday life and to feel a benefit to viewing artwork, essentially. So I think this is something which comes naturally to Daiga. You can see in the way she makes artwork and also, you know, curates shows, that she does it in an intuitive way, which is really about loving what you do, basically.
We're standing underneath a piece called Orme. Could we start by talking about when it's from, to get a sense of where it falls within the work that's in this show, but also about the materiality of the work?
Yeah, so I saw this work as part of an installation at the New Museum at New York, the solo show Daiga had called What Eats Around Itself, a really incredible show, which was quite different to this show, more experiential. The work was, there were sort of several works constructed in this way, which were packed into a sort of dense area in the museum. And the show itself was about the organism lichen, which grows on stones and trees and has a unique ability to sort of photosynthesize and die at the same time, basically. And I guess that reference is really interesting in relation to the materialism of the work. So in all of Daiga's work, there's this sense of things shape-shifting, like I said, and the organism changing and evolving, which is then replicated in the sculptural form. In terms of what we've got here, these are actually resin. So people confuse them as glass bulbs, if you like. But actually, it's a resin coated on top of spandex, and again, we have a sort of felted material above it. So it's one of the few works in the show that actually has this type of textiles used in it. The reason I wanted to include it in the exhibition was because actually it just comes back to an earlier time in Daiga's career when she was making work in quite a different way, actually. There's something more refined about this show, I think. It sort of steps back, and the way in which works unravel in front of you is slower. Whereas at the New Museum, this was a really intense exhibition, and also conceived around a time where a deadly disease spread around the world. So it felt very pertinent at that moment in time, whereas now this work feels very different. I think registers in a very different way.
Well, it feels quite bodily still, and it feels like skin and organs and pods. There is a sense of the sinister and the uncanny about it, and I noticed that you placed it here in this area, which is the slightly more dimly lit part of the show. Yeah. So are you trying to kind of tease that out by the lighting of
I think absolutely. I think that's what Daiga's ambition is to tease something out. I mean, I think actually in lots of the work, whilst it's very beautiful, there are things which sort of relate to this uncanny idea of a sort of, you know, disgusting bodies in some way, which is drawn out perhaps in an abstracted way, but it is absolutely there. And again, it comes back to this idea of the audience actually reflecting, you know, on their own experience and their own bodily experiences. Yeah, I think it's a really nice analogy.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to just finish by talking about the audience that you have here. It's always interesting to talk to somebody who's curating exhibitions in a university setting, because you have so many different kinds of audience. And it does also feel to me in the conversations we've had before that has very much been part of what informed not only the selection of the works, but also how they're installed throughout the spaces.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, we have a very diverse audience at the University of Warwick. I mean, our immediate audience is the students here, so a very young audience, but also we do a lot of outreach and engagement with school groups. So there are weekends where we have hundreds of kids in the gallery as part of a family Sunday. But also we have an audience which comes from Coventry city centre, so is ethnically an incredibly diverse audience. So across the entirety of the programme, we try and support all of our audiences to be represented in the shows we make here. But also, like I was saying earlier, we want audiences to feel like they can come together under one sort of holistic offer, I suppose. And I think that's what Daiga's show is doing. It's about where we can enjoy artwork together.
One other question occurred to me as you were talking, which is about where we are and about bringing a Latvian artist who represented Latvia at the Venice Biennale. And that mission to show work, which is not necessarily going to be finding an audience and a foothold in a lot of spaces in this country, and how that falls into your programming.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a hugely international audience at Warwick, so including international artists is really important to us. You see that right across the programme, but also when you look back previous years in the Mead Gallery's programme, international artists have been a really important part of what we do and continue to be an important part of what we do. You know, we believe very strongly in an international community, so it wouldn't make sense for us to only show British artists. But at the same time, in saying that, I think what we really like the idea of doing is bringing international ideas to local people, and to show people that being an artist is actually something they can be. It's, you know, it shouldn't feel out of reach for people. You know, this is a legitimate occupation.
Coming back to the subject of color, but also reflection, iridescence, translucency, this particular area of the exhibition really brings that all together. So can we talk about a work like this, for example, and her approach to color? And is this embedded color and into these materials, into that kind of frilliness of the material as well?
Yeah, I think Daiga has a unique way of bringing these things together, I guess. And as you said, in this work, which is called Joanna's Joy, there is a lot of joy in the work. You get this amazing, again, this sort of painterly sensibility, which is applied later on once the sculpture comes together. I mean, I also really like the way you have these stripes at the top, which feels, you know, quite sort of childlike, actually. And Daiga was telling me that her daughter was playing with crayons, and she saw two crayons come together and thought, I'm going to turn that into a sculpture. So two different coloured crayons come together, and she turned it into this dowling. But absolutely, you know, you get this incredible iridescence, which, you know, the reason why we wanted to include this work in such a central space is because it's essentially sparkling because of the light in the gallery, right? And it's also the way Daiga has chosen to light some of the work. So you don't find that she places light directly onto a sculpture. It's often just to the side or something. So light in this instance actually bouncing off of the floor back up to the work. So you see the sort of quality of paint, this, you know, glistening quality in a really unique way.
Let's move on to that wall. There's something that's really nice about this installation, which is the way that it kind of feels like a wall drawing that then integrates a sculpture that then carries on as a wall drawing. And talking about how the light works in this gallery, where you're standing completely determines how you read it. But I understand that there was an element of chance to the way that came together.
Yeah, absolutely. So this work has been realised in this format before, and actually what Daiga was able to do was continue the drawn line in this work. So we have the sculpture element, which feels very much sort of like it's referencing an Eva Hesse sculpture. You know, an artist Daiga is very much inspired by, but also this drawn line brings in a very different sort of minimalist, almost hard-edged abstraction to the work as well, which I think is really beautiful. And just, you know, again is emphasising that sense of the soft and the hard edge coming together in actually a harmonious way rather than a conflicting one.
And also there's that absolute solidity of this, but in the reflection, it is almost like water.
Yeah, absolutely. So Daiga uses a very specific sort of silicone to make these forms. And often, with silicone, what they tell you is that it takes a long time to dry and you have to wait for the off-gassing to take place. And off-gassing is about removing the bubbles. Daiga wants to keep the bubbles because you get these incredible reflections. And like you say, it feels like something which is, far more fluid actually in its reflections. Yeah.
This sculpture called River, it combines quite a lot of what I've begun to sense are characteristic aspects of the work. Mm-hmm. One of them is positive and negative space and the volume of work. When you look at this, it's quite bulbous from far away, but the closer you get to it, the more you see the layers. For example, this bottom layer, which may seem solid from far away, is actually mesh, and so it begins to hold light in its own way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this work is really about a sense of movement and trying to incorporate that into the sculpture. So as you said, it's called River. From thinking about rivers, we're thinking about movement, the fluidity of water, and then I think that what Daiga's trying to do is to transport those notions into sculptural form, basically. So the top of the work, which is hung very high to the ceiling in here, is quite literally a flowing form. And then you get something which feels more like a kind of gushing water, I suppose, at the end. So whether it's the feeling of a waterfall or foaming water on a beach, washing your feet, and absolutely it really captures light as well in an exceptional way, I think, with the mesh dressing at the bottom of the work.
It's like ripples, but it kind of made solid.
Yeah, exactly. And as viewers experience the work, with people being in the space, I think you'll actually get a bit of swaying to this work as well. So that sense of movement is then encouraged even more.